When Constantinople fell in 1453, Europe was in shock. It did not take a genius to see what would come next: an all-out attack on Western Europe. The remaining Venetian positions in Greece were doomed, and then it would be either Italy or Hungary, or both. Pope Nicholas V called for a crusade to push back the Ottoman tide, but responses were tepid. The Emperor, Friedrich III, convened 3 imperial diets between 1454 and 1456, but hardly any of the European rulers attended, not even the Emperor himself. These diets painted the now familiar picture of a dithering, indecisive, and, as some claimed, cowardly monarch. Whether he was indeed any such thing is not relevant, because the perception stuck and the facts spoke for themselves. When in 1454, 1455, and 1456 the Ottomans struck Greece, Serbia, and then Hungary, no help came from the empire. The Hungarians, themselves bitterly divided, rallied around their greatest soldier, János Hunyadi. The Sultan's target was Belgrade, the gateway to Central Europe. The city stands at the junction of the Danube and the Sava, just upriver from the Iron Gates. Every land-based crusade to the east had passed this way. Now the Ottomans were coming up in the other direction. Belgrade had always been heavily fortified, but between 1404 and 1427 it had been turned into the most extensive and most advanced military complex in Europe. On the hill in the center of the city stood the fortress that was surrounded by the walled upper town, which held the garrisons and armories, and then the lower town, surrounded by another, a third wall with only 4 major gates, and on 2 sides Belgrade was protected by the rivers Sava and Danube. Sultan Mehmet II, conqueror of Constantinople, came prepared. He brought 22 great cannon, ships to seal the river, and somewhere between 30,000 and 100,000 men, a host almost as large and as well equipped as the one that had breached the Theodosian walls that had held for 1,000 years. Against him stood a garrison of 7,000 men inside the city of Belgrade, and 2 relief armies coming down the Danube River. Of the relief forces, one was János Hunyadi's professional army of veterans, perhaps 10 to 12,000 men, hardened by decades of fighting. They had campaigned with him from 1442 to 1444, had bloodied the Ottomans at Vienna, and had survived the disaster of 1448. The second army was a force of roughly 30,000 peasant crusaders, inspired and rallied by the fiery Franciscan preacher Giovanni Capistrano. Few had proper weapons, many carried pitchforks and flails. They did, however, possess a makeshift flotilla, perhaps 200 small ships, to challenge the Ottoman blockade. Mehmet II reached Belgrade before Hunyadi. He encircled the city by land, and his ships patrolled the river. His giant cannon pounded the town's outside wall in preparation for a final assault. Hearing of Hunyadi and Capistrano's approach, the Sultan might have intercepted him, but he did not. He gambled he could take the city first, and then deal with the relief forces. Well, he was wrong. When Hunyadi arrived, Belgrade was still holding out. To reach the city, the relief army launched a daring river assault. In a 5-hour battle, their ships broke through the Ottoman blockade and resupplied the garrison. That was a setback for the Ottomans, but Mehmet never intended to starve the city but to storm it, and for that he needed to break the walls with his cannon, which were now battering Belgrade day and night. On July 21st, 1456, a breach opened, and Mehmet sent in his elite troops, the Janissaries. In a running street battle, the Ottoman forces hacked their way towards the center of town, one house and one street at a time. Hunyadi ordered the defenders to gather all flammable material and build barricades of tarred wood throughout the city. And wherever the Janissaries had broken through, he ordered his archers to set these wooden barriers alight. A wall of fire swept through the city, cutting the attackers off. Surrounded and isolated, the Janissaries were overwhelmed and massacred. Meanwhile, their comrades fighting on the other side of the wall of fire were pinned down by the Hungarian relief forces and suffered heavy losses. By nightfall, both sides withdrew to their respective camps. The next morning, discipline in the Hungarian army collapsed. Capistrano's crusaders poured from the gates to plunder the abandoned Ottoman positions and stumbled into fresh fighting. More and more men joined from either side until it all turned into a full-scale battle. Capistrano could no longer hold back, and the peasant crusaders stormed out of Belgrade. Hunyadi and his professional forces had no choice but to follow. He struck for the Ottoman artillery, expecting Mehmet to concentrate on defending the cannon and with it his only chance to take Belgrade. Now that eased the pressure on the Crusaders, who managed to break through the Ottoman lines. They even captured the Ottoman camp, and Hunyadi took the artillery. Now Mehmet II rallied his troops and led them personally in a counter-attack. Encouraged by their Sultan's bravery, his beaten-up forces recovered their camp, but they could go no further. Mehmet II himself had been injured, and the cannon were lost. In the night, the Ottomans buried their dead, put their wounded onto carts, and headed back to Constantinople. The road to Hungary has remained closed. Belgrade had held. The Ottoman tide would not reach it again for another 70 years.